welcome everyone to a builds refresh for Wisp. Now, I will first start out with saying that we are going to be showing off two builds today. The usual build most people will probably be running whenever you're just doing your regular missions and stuff. And then also a build that you're probably going to want to run whenever you just get garbage in ETA or EDA or in Circuit. That will work pretty much anywhere and under basically any conditions if you need to output damage with Wisp. For that, the build that is kind of the usual suspects is this. It is a full Umbral setup. It has Archon Stretch for both generating energy because our one inflicts electricity and turns it on, and also because the range is okay here. We're on Fused Reservoir, totally for convenience. If you wanted to, you could put PSF up into this slot, and that is also just for convenience. This build is so flexible that we do get to run double Exilus mods and really not care. Run Adaptation for even more survivability on top of what we're going to be getting out of Arcane Blessing and the Umbral set. And of course, our one just giving us tons and tons of health. And we get to be on, of course, Intensify at 77% and Blind Rage at 99%, because we don't need to cast that often with our 155% duration on the abilities that we're usually going to be subsuming for tons and tons of power. With that, it is worth noting that this build can, instead of like the Umbral setup stuff and instead of Umbral Intensify, if you specifically want to, run Precision Intensify. And that is 90% strength just for your fourth ability, which is what you're going to be usually removing with, Eclipse, Roar, Nourish, the usual suspects that want tons of strength and can go into your fourth slot because you're usually not using your 4. That is also an option here. The full Umbral setup, of course, is going to give you more initial health, a bunch more armor, which is just going to add like a good amount of DR at the armor level to you. And just generic good stuff. But there's a few different, variations on this that you can go through depending on what your subsume is or where you want your subsume if you really don't care about Will-O-Wisp and you want to keep her 4 for whatever reason. And this is the setup. Bellicose here is obviously very, very good because alongside Blessing, we get to over 3,000 health. So this is the full 72% that you will end up on. And then we're just on Corrosive Projection to make enemies lose a bit of armor, which is just a generic damage increase for us. It is worth noting I do not have an Oro polarity up here. You can do that, and then on this other build we're going to show, usually we'll run Growing Power. The other build we're going to show is the new Cataclysm build. So this is Cataclysmic Gate, which is basically you can plop down an orb with your 4 that is going to do guaranteed heat and radiation status effects for 10 seconds. Now, there's quite a bit to talk about with this. For this build, we have replaced our 2 with Roar, which is a significant damage increase because it double stacks on Soul Gate whenever we have the Cataclysmic Gates down for a lot of additional damage that we do kind of need. We sacrifice quite a lot of strength here, but that is because we need the range, so Overextended is kind of non-negotiable in this setup. Fused Reservoir is still very, very good because the synergy with our 4, we want to have all 3 of our motes at all times because then this will also do Corrosive and also get a damage boost at the same time. Otherwise, things look sort of similar, right? We have to make room for Cataclysmic Gate, which nothing we can do about that. It can't even go into the Exilus slot if you didn't want to run Fused Reservoir. We do also want to make room for Archon Vitality because this is going to be doubling the heat procs that are going to be applied with every tick of Soul Gate. Other than that, Archon Stretch still works here with our 1, which is great. Blind Rage, we kind of just need this amount of strength. And speaking of needing this amount of strength, instead of being on Blessing, which you could run, I am kind of preferring the higher strength output that we get from Molt Augmented and Arcane Bellicose. It is worth noting that because Blessing will also increase Bellicose a bit, because we're not getting to its cap here, you can go for that instead of Augmented if you value the survivability increase. And this build has much worse survivability. We don't really have room for adaptation here, which is a really big survivability hit. And in addition to that, we are on Roar because it's going to affect our 4, whereas on this build, we're on Eclipse, so you can just slap on an additional 75% DR whenever you want, but that is not an option here because we need Roar to increase our ability damage. But the main thing about this build is that it is worse. I think it's just objectively worse than just running gun buffing stuff on Wisp and rooting around and being functionally invincible, but sometimes you don't have good guns, and if you bring this to EDA or ETA, you can just plop down the sun in a few locations and it'll burn all the enemies to death. And that's better than a lot of the crappy guns you might be stuck with, so I think it is worth talking about. For that, this builds video is more about Cataclysm, like Cataclysmic Gate, than anything else, so we're not going to be like showing this in the test. You know what this does with a good gun if you've seen my Wisp builds in the past. We're shooting guys. The like fire rate buff and everything that we get from reservoirs is stellar. That's combining with like Roar or Eclipse style buffs on your weapons, which are a huge damage increase. And that can even be combined on top of getting the Breach Surge little motes killing everybody, which can also be used on this build. So overall, it's an interesting build, but the major problem with it is actually that it inflicts radiation damage. Well, specifically the radiation procs. The damage is fine, but the radiation procs on enemies do kind of ruin what Soulgate wants you to do, which is place down an orb and have enemies walk into it and burn and die to death. Unfortunately, whenever it is always inflicting radiation, as a group of enemies, if you have like enemies in a row, the first enemy that walks in will get procced with radiation, and then he is the enemy of the guys behind him that aren't in the radius yet. So they just start shooting at each other, and not everybody walks into your death orb field, making it an insanely inefficient ability, much like the way Corvex's one can be very problematic in that exact same way. So, unfortunately, Cataclysmic Gate is severely nerfed by inflicting radiation on enemies, meaning its kill rate is not phenomenal because of that specifically. It's not that the damage is bad, it's that the function of enemies getting into the radius is, like, horrific. For that, though, in terms of just showing off the damage, we are just going to, like, do the regular setup here, showing this off against these guys. Just to pause up here, I will show the difference here. Using your 4 just, like, raw with nothing, you can see that the damage is, like, nothing to particularly write home about. This is okay. This is at 200% strength as a reminder, and this is also with Archon Vitality, doubling the stacks that we're going to be getting. And you can see, like, it'll kill these, like, 230 Lancers and stuff, but this is nothing great. That's obviously only one cast, and you can double or even triple up on these because you can have 3 orbs at once. Also, your 4 will continue on for a while, but you do want to just immediately cancel it because that's kind of the whole point of this build. But you can get much faster stacking if you put like a bunch of orbs in one area. That being said, that's much more energy intensive, so not necessarily advised. Also, because I didn't mention, because I don't have any, I do not currently have shards in Wisp. Pretty much in all builds, it's always right to just do 5 full power Tau strength shards, and then any to taste shards you want, if you want cast speed or parkour speed, or whatever else. Those are all always fine, but the slots would ideally, for her power output, always be full on strength for an additional 75, because she just wants to stack up strength on every single one of her builds. So that was it at, like, kind of static levels, which is, like, fine. At low levels, it's just going to kill guys. With R1, it will perform significantly better because it not only will get a damage boost, it will also start inflicting corrosive, which is a very good debuff on enemies, meaning they're just going to take more damage because their armor is going to be reduced, alongside the armor reduction from heat. So you can immediately see that there's quite a bit of additional performance that we're getting out of this, just in terms of the just raw damage it's doing, and of course, like, the additional procs that we're getting are quite nice. So good stuff here. You can see much better performance. And then finally, whenever we add all that up with our last additional thing, which is Roar, Roar will just kind of double stack on this and do great things. So 1 orb can, like, pretty easily take this group out. This is, of course, without using our 3. Spamming your 3 on groups is pretty non-economical, let's say. But it is something that you can do to both blind and, like, create, like, the little motes that'll seek out and kill enemies. But you can see that even on these 230 gunners, they'll still die just from 1 orb if you are using all of your buffs in tandem, which is kind of what you're looking for. This means that it can kill in things like ETA and such. If you want to see this against the Murmur, of course, we have, like, the Murmur group here, because that's, like, you know, one of the factions you'll be seeing pretty often with this. Of course, it's not going to, like, suddenly get through attenuation or anything like on the Scaldra Dedicants and such, so that will still just take the time that it does take. But you can see on the Murmur, it is pretty effective. It's less effective on, like, the big enemies that have, like, the additional DR, like the Hollow Veins and such like that. But in terms of just locking down an area, clearing enemies out, whether that's an Alchemy or Mirror Defense or what have you, it's going to do pretty well. And also our Roar ran out, so there's also that as a consideration to add on to here too. But yeah, it's overall pretty good. Obviously, you're able to spam out your 4 pretty quickly and, like, put down multiple orbs as needed. With that, there's not a whole lot else, like, to look at. I mean, like, turning on the enemy's AI, you're still pretty defensive here. If you are, like, you know, just using your 4, one of the benefits of it proccing radiation is that the enemies are enemies with one another. So they're not going to be shooting you if they're, like, in an orb, which you can just put on yourself, which is kind of an extra layer of safety that you don't really necessarily need, but it is effective. It is effective enough at keeping you a little bit more safe. Now, the thing that I didn't want to show here, because it kind of adds to the damage in a way that is not, like, needed at all, is that I do usually run a Tazakor on this. The Tazakor worm setup that you probably want looks like this, where you're going to have Mystic Bond for some more free casting, because your energy economy can be a little rough around the edges. Even more fire rate than you're normally getting from your one is just good stuff to have, and it's a thing Worm can just do. And then, of course, because we're not making room for PSF in this build, Negate is a great thing to reduce some statuses, which will include knockdowns. And then Manifold Bond, of course, is just making it so that Worm can do more Guardian, do more Negate, make you more survivable, and so on and so forth, and still, of course, give you things like Primed Animal Instinct and all that good business. Generally, you do want to be on Xeneric for this, because there can be some startup problems, which you could also solve by just including a starting energy shard, but that's pretty much what's going on. Unfortunately, like, you know, the kind of mission flow of killing enemies, especially if you're in a like defensible position, unless you're just like waiting, which in mobile defense or in mirror defense is what you're going to be doing. You don't really need to kill the enemies. But in places like survival and regular defense, your 4 is going to delay those missions more so than help speed them up. So I would probably not use it there unless you want some teammates to be maybe a little unhappy with you. With that, though, let's jump into Tav. Reminder, the enemies in Tav are heat resistant, so that is a factor for this build, but not a huge one. It still will definitely just kill them. They are, of course, level 100 instead of being level 230, so there's a significant, you know, weakening that you get there, and even at higher levels, you start casting your 4 twice, and the enemies will die. So yeah, let's just jump into Tav. Okay, jumping into Tav. Once again, like, we are on the, you know, this is the worst build of like the two things you can do with Wisp, which is just kind of like weapons platform her up and make her super insanely survivable and support your team. Doing this, as I said before, is just kind of worse. But it is the new thing, and it's worth talking about because in some situations it might come up. We do want to drop a Xeneric here for just some initial energy. We do want to drop our 1. And funny thing, because we're on Bellicose, you can actually drop your 1 twice, and it'll round up your energy a little bit, and also your health and regen, so kind of a funny one there. We do want to make sure our 4 gets turned on, and then we can start putting our suns in hallways. Ideally be grabbing some energy off some of these initial enemies. Big note about the 4, it is sadly line of sight based. And because it is line of sight based, yes, that does mean that it is, you know, it's not going to go through walls. It'll go through like these little doorways where it'll like see, but it won't see past that. And that is unfortunate because it means that like there's a lot of choke points that are just like not great for you that you can manage. But still, the biggest problem with it is going to be that enemies don't like move towards it. You can see it probably happening here, where like enemies just kind of get like pushed back here because they're shooting the enemies at the edge. We do want to keep roar up, of course, but just keeping your suns down and even throwing some in the middle here is gonna like be just fine. The duration also on this augment, not particularly fantastic, but if it was higher than this, I think it would actually cause even like more spawn problems. But the thing that you're going to notice is happening is as I like have to push further in each direction as I go back and forth with these, and that is caused directly by the radiation on this ability, because it just means that enemies can't push through the orb and die; they get stuck, and that getting stuck is not ideal. Other big note here is that like you do of course want to make sure that you're continually picking up your 1 buff whenever you can, which by having it in like a central location like I have here pretty much takes care of that. But generally speaking, whenever you're putting this down in locations where it can be seen by a lot of enemies and can kill a lot of enemies, you're going to be pushing yourself back on 2 fronts. An Exmi here we can just shoot and get rid of. Of course, with the excessive fire rate we have, you can just kind of fire the Boltor forever. Just, like, pick a direction and just keep shooting. This is, I mean, like, using good weapons like this, even if you're just, like, doing it for the funny of, like, oh, infinite ammo Boltor, like, never even putting it in Incarnate form, is, like, also, especially if you're using, like, the better buffing build, just better than using R4 here. But, you know, not really what the video's about if I just did that all the time. But it is a factor for sure. You can see on the map here, enemies like getting pushed to that edge, like where I'll put my 4 here, and on the edge, the enemies will get all irradiated and turn around. It's just a real shame that this ability unfortunately works that way. Luckily, in like some rooms like this, like in a spawn room, they can't really get out of the radius properly. So if you can put it in a room where they're actively spawning, then you do kind of forego like the downsides there a little bit, not entirely, I would say. Like dropping this in like a central room just to kill these types of enemies. Tazakor, of course, helping to buff up our survivability because we do lose a lot by being on this build. Having a defensive sentinel is definitely something that I would suggest you do. If you are going to bring this to an ETA or an EDA, you will want something to beef up your defenses a bit. That's also the consideration for like still running Blessing instead of running Augmented on this build. Is if you're willing to have like a lesser kill rate on like what your 4 is going to be able to put out, having the additional 1200 health can go a long way. And it's only really going to matter in like the longer missions because, you know, health orbs. But that can also be supplemented a bit by running Death Cube because more enemies are going to be giving you more orbs. You can see our 3 there. 3 plus 4 can take care of Mania pretty well if there's like a group of enemies there. But of course, like your weapon buffed to high hell. Well, Mania can block, but that's, you know, not a huge deal for us. Regardless, we can just throw it on our 3, throw it on another 4. Like our 3 blinding him is more than enough to really neuter it. The only real threat to Wisp is pretty much always going to be violence. But I think violence actually can't dispel the blind on himself. So that is kind of an interesting consideration. Pretty sure that is actually not a thing that he can do. But regardless, usually you're bringing like really good weapons on Wisp when possible. So it's not like the Acolytes can really do much about you. Especially if you're not on this build and you're on the regular build where you've got adaptation built up, plus all of like the additional DR from things like Eclipse if you're running that for like a very, very safe build. And even violence is going to have like, you know, a lot of trouble making serious headway through all the nonsense you can do. Also, your 1 buff is sticky. Much like, you know, that's really come up more recently in the past. Your motes are not dispellable. They are like a buff that is like given to you by your 1, but they're not turned off by violence. At least last time I checked. It's been a little bit since I have had violence actually meaningfully dispel me as Wisp. That is an interesting consideration, is you don't really have to worry about that, so you're still going to have like, you know, your huge amount of additional health and all that other good business. Enemy that statuses don't work on. You can also like put this up on walls and stuff if it's convenient for the line of sight. And all of that kind of business, too. You can see we're at, like, 6 minutes. We're, like, 500-some kills. It's, like, fine. Around here, grab some more air on both ends. Have Worm be re-upping our shields in business. And it's just kind of like an all-right area denial strategy. Whenever you're doing, like, very well on your energy economy, you can just, like, throw this down kind of wherever. Or move around as needed. Also, now that we've built up Augmented, it's worth noting you can drop again to get a few more % out of Bellicose as well, and of course get an additional health increase. So that is quite good, to just make sure you re-up your 1 as makes sense. Yeah, pretty, like, you know, it's just a build that'll work whenever you are, like, you know, if your options are Banshee, Limbo, Wisp in ETA, and your weapons all suck, this will be my go-to. For sure. There's definitely no shortage of some pretty rough weapons that you can still roll in ETA. Though that's pretty unlikely now, but also has to be a weapon that you have that's good, so that can be troublesome for people whose inventories are much smaller. Just at 7 minutes here. And it's just kind of like, you know, it's almost like the gameplay loop of this, because you do have to keep going like further and further away and like kind of like bouncing back and placing your orb in different spots just to like catch up to where enemies currently are like kind of clumped up at. It is like a little reminiscent of kind of like the gardening style damage outputting that Saren does, obviously on like a much worse level. But having to like change what you're doing pretty actively is reminiscent of that, at least. In a small way. we will just, like, buzz through this. Obviously, my kill rate is being affected by, like, just doing the better thing. What if I was just Wisp and shooting a gun? But, you know. I suspect you'll shoot most guns that you'd be holding even in ETA. But yeah, we're at, like, you know, 700 some kills at 8 minutes or so. Probably going to end up at, like, that, like, 80, 90 KPM, which is pretty normal. But kind of, like, what this build is tested at. I do think that, like, just the removal of radiation from your 4 would probably pretty quickly... Oh, hey, Violence. We get to find out if he can get rid of moats now. I'll give him a second. Can you turn off moats yet? You shouldn't be able to, because it works like Gara's too. Yeah, no, can't turn off moats still. Yeah, shouldn't be able to, and can't. Violence, give me a second. There we go. Can you turn off your own blindness? You should not be able to, because it's an effect that's stuck to him. Yeah, no, he can't. Yeah, that stuff all still works as it has. He can also still be shot in the face. Goodbye. Always good when we can get some testing in. Just making sure things still work as remembered. We love to see it. I haven't seen Violence in, like, any of my tests for Wisp up to this point. Which has been nice. Though, I mean... From that showing of literally fucking around with him, maybe it wouldn't matter super a lot. But yeah, like, this is just kind of the new thing that Wisp can get up to. It is fine. It is A-okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, if you wanted Wisp to be able to be, like, you know, a little more Shadow Wizard Money Gang and be casting these spells, it kind of is that. And, not the best thing in the world, not the worst. Also just, like, actively cast as you're, like, running through a level. It'll kind of, you know, burn some things down behind you. Just about at that 10-minute mark. 900 kills. Yeah, we reached the 90 KPM, which has been kind of the high end of what I have seen. Out here, Flame XY. And then just, you know, generally put our 1 on, get a little bit more speed through a level. Parkour Shard's also very reasonable on Wisp if you wanted to speed her up even a bit more. But yeah, like, it's a reasonable build to take to restrictive environments. I don't think it's going to be the thing that most Wisp players are going to gravitate to, unless you just really like how it is thematically. And it is, like, at least something for her 4 to be able to do. But yeah, that's going to do it for Wisp. I will see you tomorrow. Hey everybody, it's time to thank the patrons that are hanging around and supporting the channel. So, to start with that, the $10 patrons are Atheon, Alex Farnham, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Candelathra, Blob World, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Harthorne, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Vicokill, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Wodad01, and Zeraphir. Also, thanks, of course, to all of the other patrons for supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. It's a little sneak peek on what we're getting into. There's going to be a lot more of these kind of big re-reviews of weapon types and their new builds and stuff as things changed a lot at the end of last year. And of course, there's also planned new free-to-play before we get into any, you know, more big updates. So look forward to that.